Welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of Beneath the Surface, where it's an honor to be sitting here with Nick Deiuliis, who's currently the director at CNX, spent many years there as CEO. We go back pretty far, and we're going to talk a little bit about the old days today. Love for you to tell everybody about yourself and your journey before you got to CNX.
Yeah, I mean, it's great being here. Thanks for having me, John. We do have a lot of history together, all of it good. I hope we can touch on some of that. My background, it's very similar to yours, and a lot of people in the energy space up in Appalachia. I'm from Western PA originally, grew up in Pittsburgh, and sort of a family of blue-collar workers, steel mills, railroads, some coal mining way back in the day, and sort of tight-knit family, but a family that sort of the first generation, first person in a family to go to college, and at the time, I sort of liked chemistry and got into engineering, not knowing what an engineer did, not knowing any engineers, right? Not knowing anybody that went to college. And just sort of wanting to develop a skill set that would let you stay in the region, because I love the region. That's where my family was. It's all I really knew. And having the opportunity that the energy industry brought to it back in 1990. You want to go back a ways. But that's sort of my background and the start, how I got into the industry and was able to sort of stay in Appalachia and stay part of an industry that's sort of reinvented itself over the past couple decades.
Multiple decades, and a lot of it there at CNX. One of the biggest things that we wanted to talk about today too is just the changes that you've seen within the industry, since you started.
The way I would define the change, perpetual. It's been perpetual, never-ending change. And a lot of it, I mean, you look back a couple decades, it's just breathtaking what's occurred. I went starting working for a company at the time, Consol, that was predominantly exclusively a coal company. And that was, like I said, in the early 90s. It then evolved into a coal and natural gas business, sort of dual businesses. And now, of course, with CNX, it's exclusively natural gas and midstream shale development. And you just look at that sort of description of the business at the start in the early 90s and then what the description is today that I just walked you through. That in and of itself is just that breathtaking change. But then you start to think about the technology, the skill sets, what the individuals and the teams are equipped with today, what they bring to the table versus what it was like not that long ago. We've gone through a period of this industry and this region that I don't know if anybody that came before us had that sort of level and rate of change that they've experienced. And I'm going back, in case of the company that I work for, 165 years. It's a very, very old company. Lincoln was president when that company was first created. All the prior generations and sort of iterations that were deep well, none of them, as great as they were, and as much innovation and disruptive technology they brought to the table, none of them went through the rate and the level of change that you've experienced or that we've experienced together. So I guess, we got lucky that we came into the industry in our careers at the right time. We had an opportunity to be part of this. Hasn't always been easy, right? Hasn't always been graceful. But wow, you just look at the cumulative impact of it. The best way I could describe it would be perpetual.
It astounds me, to be able to go out and see the technology and advancements and what's happened in the industry, even, over the last 5 years, over the last decade, over the last 15. Back in 2015, I remember looking at KPIs, and we're looking at lateral feet per day from a drill out perspective. And our KPI metric back in 2015 was 1,500 lateral feet per day. Now
we were thrilled.
We were thrilled with that back in 2015. Fast forward that a little over a decade, we're double that. Easy, right? So you're looking at 3,000 to 4,000 lateral feet per day. So if you look at that type of improvement and that the type of teamwork and innovation that went into getting that done, it's been absolutely amazing.
Those KPIs, those rates, and you can pick other KPIs that are critical ones too. To me, I've always looked at it, and I've come around to this view. I didn't sort of start out with this view. I initially went right to those KPIs. That's what we want to hit. That's what we're solving for. Did we hit it? Did we miss it? Did we exceed it? That type of thing. What do you adjust? As time's gone on, I've come to sort of the realization, I guess, that, and it took me a while, that's sort of the output. That's the end. That's the cumulative result. It's more of a symptom, a good symptom, right? And if you back up and you try to identify, well, what were the drivers? What were the true root causes of those KPIs improving to the level that they have? It was basically two things in the end. It was the team, those people. We are, at the end of the day, we're in the people business more than anything else. It's the most complicated machine or input to the process you'll ever find, right? That never changes. And technology. And technology was the other big one. Show Revolution 101, everybody knows that. But you get sort of the human capital side of this figured out to the extent that this industry and companies like Deepwell have, and you get the technology side figured out and disrupting. You put those together, the only thing that would be missing at that point would be the right values or the culture, whatever you want to call it. And if you got those values and culture with those two things, I think that's what spits out those KPIs that are sort of phenomenal and just like, wow, how do we get this good at it, right? And what's the future going to hold? But it's people, technology, coupled with the right values and culture.
Backing up just a little bit more and just talking a little bit about your career, did you ever envision yourself being the caliber leader, if you would have went back 20 years ago, if you went back 30 years ago and said, would you know that I'm going to be where I'm at this point? And along the way, mentors, people that you felt had influenced you throughout your life. I always think that's really important to try to get that story out. I'm really interested to hear it.
Yeah, well, did I foresee that back in the day? What I ended up doing ultimately? No, not with the specifics of the job of being the CEO of a public company or Consol Energy or CNX afterward, but I will say what I did sort of set as a goal or an objective that I did hope to see come to fruition. I knew I loved the industry. I knew I loved energy. I was very passionate about it. I wanted to stay in energy my entire career. I loved the region, loved Appalachia, so the ability to stay in the region and in the industry was something that was definitely front and center with me. And I ended up loving the company because of the values and the culture. So in some ways, did I envision having my entire career in one place? Yes, that was absolutely an objective. The job titles? No. That wasn't planned, and that wasn't always smooth, of course. A lot of it was timing. A lot of it was circumstance and luck. But by the same token, companies and stories and industries like energy and individuals, you make your own luck, right? So there were some components there that I had as objectives from the get-go, and I've been able to fulfill those. And then, the rest of it just sort of unfolded because of facts and circumstances and timing. The mentors that you bring up, those were huge. I'd call them catalysts that got me from that young engineer that didn't know left from right, in the early 20s to what the career ended up being. And you think about mentors over the years and who they were and what sort of attributes they brought to the table. I think that's been an evolution too. Initially, my mentors, like a lot of people, were family members, my grandparents, my grandfathers, and that work ethic. Showed up every day, worked and focused, and their job was to not just provide for their family, but to get home safely every day. So that value of safety being at the top, that was sort of instilled in me at a young age by just watching. There was no lectures. You were just watching and observing, and you learned and you emulated what you liked and what you thought was worthwhile. Then you get into your career early in, and there's always going to be those mentors that invest the time. And that's something that you look back on, that how fortunate are we that you and I had those types of mentors when we were at those young, forming years of your career, when somebody took the time out to sort of, sit you down and nurture that and fix this and improve that and attenuate this. If I didn't have that, we wouldn't be here right now. But somebody, a small group of people took the time out of their busy schedules, right, to do that. But they felt the duty, the responsibility to do that. And I think, you've sort of retained that and you're paying it back. I retained that, try to pay it back. So early on, those professionals that were just, to me, what I remember about it, they were so good at what they did. Their level of competency was 2 orders of magnitude higher than mine. And I'm looking at it intimidated, but very respectful and wanting to get to that level. How do I get to be that person? How do I get that mastery of their discipline, their job? So there was sort of a drive on my end, but there was the willingness of those mentors to sort of help me get that learning curve up and running. And then you get into sort of the later years where you get into bigger responsibilities and management. Brett Harvey, the prior CEO of Consol at the time before I was the CEO, sort of taught me the big picture, how to look at that vision thing and what's the strategy, what's the strategic vision, where are we going 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This isn't just a job where you're worried about only the quarter or the year. You got to take a longer term view. It's not that simple. And more recently, Will Thorndike, our prior chairman at Consol and CNX, and still on the board with us, taking an even longer-term view, his long-termism, and thinking about energy. And companies like Deepwell, companies like CNX, we're making decisions looking 20, 30 years out, from people to capital, right? So we have to have a long-term view. But it's easy to say it. It's really challenging to apply it in the real world because we're under short-term pressures. So that sort of perspective of a mentor. And Will, he's only a couple of years older than I am, and he came sort of into my professional life well into my journey. I was already a CEO. So I've had these mentors from, being knee-high family all the way through to mentors to this day that are teaching me new things, every week, every month.
Just to instill, especially in the younger generations, is you always want to have a mentor. And whenever you think everything, there's always something else that's out there that can get you better. And just approaching every single day with, I want to go in and learn something today, is the best way to attack things, and it's going to drive the most success. And looking at things, like we were talking about the industry evolution, looking at operators that you feel have been successful and operators that haven't, and or service companies that have been successful and service companies that haven't. What are they doing differently? What's some from your experiences and what you've seen throughout your career? What are some things that you can latch on to?
Do you want me to be blunt and transparent, or do you want me to be diplomatic?
I want you to hit me with it.
Okay. I think it's a huge issue. And maybe the single biggest determinant of the really successful individual or company or, frankly, industry in the marginal or average. And I think the biggest sort of inhibitor to excellence is complacency. And I think that's what you'll see within certain entities or companies in the industry or individuals within a team. And how do you get an individual or a team in the form of a company from good enough to never good enough, right? But not necessarily not pleased, but not being content. You can always advance the ball. The whole idea of continuous improvement, it's a never-ending journey. It's not an end objective and, okay, we got to that advance rate, now we're done, we're good. That's how you languish and die, okay? So there's this evolution, continuous improvement, sort of the anti-complacency view. And that I found to be an art form, not a science. There are scientific components to it. You can bring a lot of human capital tools to the table, a lot of incentives, a lot of technology, right? But somebody, the leaders, and they can be the official leaders with the title of a CEO, they can be the unofficial leaders that are really the true leaders behind the scenes that are influencing decisions and vibes of teams all the time. They're the ones that are going to have to strike that balance on which one of these tools in that toolbox am I going to pull out and apply, right? And how am I going to do that? And how much is too much? How much is not enough? That's an art form, and that's trial and error. So if you want to get to excellence as a team in a company or as an individual, you're going to have to get comfortable with some failure. You're going to fall. You're going to misfire. Things aren't always going to work out. You're not going to bat 1,000, okay? And it's just like sports, right? If you want to take the shot, you're going to miss a serious percentage of those shots. You got to get over that, and you got to tweak what's getting your chances and your percentages better. But I found that the human condition and a lot of team cultures, they're not comfortable with that. It's not a comfortable thing. Failing is not comfortable. And this continual drive of never good enough, always wanting to get better, that's not necessarily a natural state of equilibrium when it comes to human beings. So again, that art form of how do you push without breaking? Right? How do you push while being productive but not too much where you're being unproductive? You're making things worse. Easier said than done, but I think that's the single biggest differentiator. And you see it, with tech. You see it with human capital. You see it with long-termism versus the short-term. So there's different sort of filters that will differentiate who wants to truly sort of embrace the excellence and who is viewing things as good enough. But if you want to do well and achieve great things and look back and say, hey, we did something as a team or I did something as an individual that was truly unique, you're going to have to get comfortable with pushing away and rejecting complacency, that art form, and some trial and error, and sometimes, more error than success.
I love that. And it's the competitive instinct, and I think that runs pretty rich through all of Appalachia. And I think even shifting the conversation a little bit more to just your relationship and experience with Deepwell, talking about some things that, companies have done to get things right? What's next, or what's an opportunity, for us, or something that you see that we could chase to continually improve on that side?
Well, you brought up, not that long ago, it was long ago, but when Deepwell sort of reformed itself and we had those conversations about this time being different, how things weren't perfect either at the time on the Consol Energy side or right on what was Deepwell prior, and thinking through, well, what will we need to see to make this a legitimate success and the effort worthwhile? Goes back to the same old things, right? So shared values. Our values within the company were responsibility, ownership, excellence. We think a lot about, when you see it, how do you define it? Well, I'm not sure how you define it, but I know it when I see it. I know it when I see them. Those values, I felt, from the get-go that there was instilling of those within Deepwell back in 13, 15, around that time frame. And we were trying to go about the same journey. So there was, a little bit different articulation of what the values were and how we would explain it, but you got the sense that these are two entities that are sort of seeing the future in the world pretty much the same way. That's really important, right? That's sort of like, do you got the general fit? Then your focus on people. We were going through, again, a similar thing where we said, okay, if we really want excellence, if we really want ownership, if we really want responsibility, those are our core values, we got to be in the people business. And we want individuals that are long-term focused. They know when it comes to things like safety and compliance, those rank above, trump everything else that you can think of with regard to metrics. And we want people that are going to be open and transparent and bring issues to the table. We want constantly evolving technology, figuring out what the next thing is and getting, at the right spot on that learning curve. Sometimes we're the first in. CNX was that way with the Utica. But sometimes you want to be maybe just a little bit back, not the first one in, but you want to be timed where you're getting in there at the right opportunity, the right window, not too late to the game, not too early to the game. So this whole issue of technology, I think we saw things the same way there. And well, if you got, the right culture that's a good fit with each other, and then you're both in the people business and the relationship business, and then you're getting into the technology approach where you're seeing things the same way, well, then you start, at that point, the math, the numbers, the metrics, they're easy. That's why I say they're almost a result. And the tendency is to go right to, well, what's the metric going to be and what are we going to hit? Versus, wait a minute, let's think this through a little more holistically, a little more big picture. And if you get those things up front right, well, then I don't think we've ever argued about the metrics because they produce themselves after that front end. How you define success, it's all relative. Like you're looking for continuous improvement. And some are going to come into that mentorship academy ready to run Deepwell.